this meeting of Te Kaunihera o Ngā Roto o Rotorua. I'd like to advise everyone that the meeting is being live streamed. Welcome to councillors, to Mayor Chadwick and Councillor Tapsell on Zoom, staff, members of the public and the media.
Hello. Hello.
Can I ask councillors and the gallery to turn their mobile phones off or to silence? The meeting is being live streamed. We will take a morning break at 11 a.m. and a lunch break at around 12:30 p.m. Okay, so it falls to me to commence our proceedings with the karakia. Can I ask councillors to stand, please? E te atua kaharawa, ko koe te tohu rangatira, te tohu mātauranga. Manakitia mai mātau o pōnonga I tēnei wā. E mahi ne I a mātau mahi mō te painga o ngā roto o ngā tangata o te kaunihera o ngā roto o Rotorua. Takua mai ki a tau te rangimarie ki runga I a mātau I ngā wā katoa, ko ihu karaiti hoki, tō mātou ariki, amine. Almighty God, who alone is the leader of all mankind and the fountain of all knowledge, send thy blessing upon us, your servants, this day, as we strive to do all things good for the betterment of the people of the Rotorua district. May we be tolerant in ourselves at all times, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Apologies for being a bit of a one-arm paper hanger here today. Okay, I'll now call for apologies, and it looks like we're all here, but I understand, Mayor Chadwick, you will be an apology for an early departure?
Yes, apologies for that, but I can't arrange another time.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a mover and a seconder that Mayor Chadwick's apology for early departure moved? Councillor Rotorua Lakes, seconded Councillor Yates. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? None? Move on. Are there any urgent items not on the agenda? We have a very large agenda here today. No, we have none. Moving on. We now come to our first item for the day, which is petitions on the Council's Reserve proposal. We have 4 petitions to be received today. I understand they've already been received by the Chief Executive. Each petition is allocated 5 minutes for speakers, and petitioners can come to the table with their supporters if they wish, but there is 5 minutes to speak as per our standing orders. If speakers take up the whole 5 minutes, then we won't have time for questions, but if the speaking is less than 5 minutes, I'm prepared to allow councillors to ask questions. So with that, can I invite our first petitioner in respect of Kamahi Place Reserve, Mr. Chris Staines, to speak to his petition. Councillor Kumar, you have a question?
Thank you, Chairperson. As you've indicated that they've been, and according to the standing orders, that they'll be given 5 minutes. And looking at the integrity of what the situation is, I'm just wondering if we can relax the standing orders today if they go a little bit over, and we want to ask them a few more questions.
Thank you for that request. Unfortunately, we have a very large agenda today. There are hearings coming up at Strategy Policy and the next meeting of Strategy Policy and Finance on the same issue, and so there'll be a second opportunity for anyone who's made a submission to come and speak to Strategy Policy and Finance. So, as I say, we've got a big agenda. We need to run a tight meeting. So, thank you again. I invite Mr. Staines to come in present. Welcome, Mr Staines. You're speaking in respect of Kamahi Place Reserve. Can you just press the button and it'll activate your microphone? And thank you.
Thank you. Mayor and councillors, I'm presented a petition regarding to the sale of what is here listed as 16 Kamahi Place. The situation was that the council, in its wisdom, decided that they had sent somebody to actually check this out and see whether or not this was fit for whatever, and came back with an answer that there was the reason that this place could be sold off was that there was rubbish dumped there and there was vandalism. And they made a note of safety, which I could only add that it is the safest reserve I think you could ever find. The factor of the rubbish and the vandalism is totally incorrect. The rubbish that has been dumped is at the back of the service station in the other part of Wellington Park. So, as I said, the safety of this, if I don't know how many councillors will have actually viewed the particular area that's been spoken of. It is perfectly flat. There is fence 90% around it. You could just let your grandchildren run in there and they'd be as safe as they would be on your section. You can't use that as a reason for this place to be sold. The petition that we got in, we had a short time to put anything together. I have another 4 pages of submission that came to me yesterday. And the fact is that also it should be known by the councillors that back in 1990 odd, I don't know which exact year, Mr Smith bought the end of Heafy Place, which was this reserve that we're talking about was much larger then. And at that time, when they agreed to that, it was stated then, but obviously not put in writing, I gather, but it was stated then that no more would ever be sold. At the meetings that we've held to get people together to try and ascertain where in the hell all this was going, the most common statement made was the people bought their properties in this area because of the view, the serenity, and the reserve that was available. It should be known as a park, in my opinion, rather than a reserve. It only needs seating. It is used so extensively for many reasons. A lot of people walk their dogs there. There's other people drive from other areas, park in Heafy Place, and then use that portion of reserve to walk around. It's not just the locals that even use it. It's also an access for us to go from our home. We have to short walk on the footpath through the reserve, and we can go shopping at the supermarket. I think it's really unfortunate that this particular portion of reserve has been even mentioned to be sold, because it is just a gem for this area. Again, I say, I don't know how many councillors have actually viewed this actual portion Because if you saw it, you would see. And if you actually could be there when there wasn't someone else there, it would be unusual.
You've got about 5 or 10 seconds, Mr. Stones. Please carry on.
That's it from me, yeah. Okay.
Right. Thank you. Well, that's 5 minutes, and you've made your point very clear. Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you.
The second reserve subject of petition today is the Owhata Road Reserve, and I invite Dr. John Kinnenmoth and supporters to the table. Welcome.
Okay. I'm here today because of very deep feelings about the security and well-being for future generations. You can see from my age, I'm not talking about my own generation, I'm talking about the new generations, and the maintenance of what has been called in the paper as the Coulter Road Reserve, but has always been known to me as the Owhata Reserve. And in the time available to us, I can just say that we first came there well, I've been there since the 1960s and been involved in every aspect of development, and we have a reserve there today which is described in the paper as, and not particularly, it's safety issues, redundant tennis court, ageing playground, sale would enable investment into park facilities. Well, is it park facilities for there or elsewhere? Because it certainly isn't a very active reserve, but it's a valuable part. When you're a resident beside a reserve, it's not only what you do in the reserve, but it is your feeling of belonging, and the reserve gives us that opportunity to make us feel as though we are a really knit community. And having been there since the 1960s myself, I can verify that that's exactly how it is. It's there's no doubt about that. And although there's no formal activity there at present, if we go in there and take part of it away, and it was mooted as part, but one day will probably be it all, if it's taken away, you lose that activity, you lose that feeling. And that's really, we've put in a fairly detailed submission, which I hope will be considered. And really, I don't have to say too much, because we can say we've opposed the proposed changes, turning an open research area partly into housing. Who will be coming? What will be the impact on the local environment and the local population? Unknown. When they build houses, will they be single-storey houses? Sorry?
Thank you, John. And look, perhaps in the remaining 2 minutes, Chanel.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Don't give me a chance to talk, because I might talk in forever.
we do have your emails.
I'm passing over to my associate here.
Kia ora.
Morena koutou. Our local petition for Coulter Road Reserve, preserving our reserve, came in with a 97% support of people affected by the revocation of this reserve. 97%. The heartbeat of our thriving community lies in Coulter Road Reserve. whose value surpasses any dollar amount, whose revocation in any way will be felt long and deep by the residents who are there, who know her best, particularly in the cases of my children and their whanaunga, who are mana whenua, whose veins carry the same blood as the kaitiaki who were upon this whenua before any of the houses were even built on the east side. Listening to these reports of stony-faced strangers describing our reserve has been soul-crushing. No clear purpose. Not fit for use. Redundant. The playground is nearing its end of life. You are wrong. Your words describe somewhere else. Somewhere completely different. The lived experience of us neighbourhoods in that area are completely different to what these words are describing. Completely different. As Coulter Road Reserve saved us from the stresses of COVID, it was being marked as excessive. That is taking your hand and crushing the heart and soul at the centre of Coulter Road community, Ōwhata community, a space that constantly has our people in it, using it for its intended purpose. Solutions exist with our East Side hapu who are offering partnership in the use of their land blocks. Solutions exist when willing parties come together and organise the sale of private lands that they have offered to Kāinga Ora years before we even heard of the revocation of the reserves, such as the 7 acres of Mā Te Kanua or RLC's own private hectares on their private titles. Kāinga Ora have purchased land in Ōwhata already, such as the Mansfield plot. How much more must the east side give as the mangopare flies over our head constantly as the rumble and rattle of diggers scrape away at the whenua? How much more must we give?
Thank you, Chanel. Your time is up. Thank you very much for that passion. Great to see the tamariki here in support. Thank you very much. And the next petition is in respect of the Lee Road Reserve. I invite Adrian Smith to speak to this item. Welcome, Adrian.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I present this petition on behalf of close to 400 residents, ratepayers and paying visitors to our Hannahs and Holdens Bay area who signed this petition as a show of unity against the proposed sale of our Lee Road Reserve. This petition is endorsed by the Hannahs and Holdens Bay Residents and Ratepayers Association. These near 400 signatures were gathered in just 13 days. Lee Road Reserve is appreciated and utilised by all of the visitors I represent. An historic title search shows that the reserve was vested in the council, quote, in trust for recreation purposes, end quote. Lower Hannahs Bay is a neighbourhood comprised of approximately 80 households. Adding the proposed 43 Kāinga Ora transitional homes would increase the numbers of households by over 50%. Many of the petitioners have indicated they are likely to exit not only our neighbourhood, but our city should it go ahead. With this, Rotorua will lose hard-working, community-minded people, including some who provide employment. In addition to these approximate 80 households, Hannahs and Holdens Bay are home to key accommodation providers. These include 2 holiday parks, Keswick Camp, 2 resorts, and numerous Airbnbs. Residents are concerned about the negative knock-on impact the proposed sale will have on these enterprises and the downstream effect of other businesses. I represent a number of visitors who stay at the well-patronised All Seasons holiday park that is immediately adjacent to the Lee Road Reserve. These visitors, including families, school groups and sports teams, are already asking the holiday park manager before booking if there are MSD accommodation providers nearby. Most indicated they will not return if the reserve is sold for Kāinga Ora. Some patrons even questioned if you yourselves would pitch a tent next to troubles such as those currently present in the city centre. I represent a number of first-home buyers with large mortgages. Selling this reserve for 43 Kāinga Ora homes will adversely affect the values of their properties. You may accuse us of having a not in my backyard mindset, but councillors, we ask, what if you had just purchased your first home only to discover a short time later that before you purchased, behind closed doors, the council had been planning to sell your local reserve? I represent residents ranging from sole occupants to families and retirees, some of whom have been in our area for 4 generations. They have played rugby, cricket, soccer and many other recreational activities on our reserve. There is widespread concern about the impact creating a large cluster of 43 transitional homes will have. Many simply cannot afford the security systems they consider will be needed. Many wonder if you realise, Council, a recent incident in our area took police 25 minutes to respond. Existing residential land will likely experience intensification growth, and hence Lee Road Reserve will be needed even more for our recreation and well-being. Should this reserve, a valuable community asset, be sold, we will never get it back. Hannah's Bay and Holden's Bay provide an important base for tourists. We, the signatories of this petition, hold the firm view that Lee Road Reserve should remain untouched or be developed in a way that enhances our local and tourism recreation facilities. The Council's proposal has been made with total disregard for the interests and well-being of every resident. Its secretive approach and adoption of pace over local conversation is alarming and undemocratic. By signing this petition, residents and ratepayers have indicated they expect Lee Road Reserve to be there in perpetuity, not sold off by the Council. We implore the Council to act as visionary planners, not ambulances. We oppose the sale of the Lee Road Reserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Nicely to time, and we got your point very clear. So our final petition is in respect of all the council reserves, and Don Patterson is here to speak to the petition. Welcome, Don.
Ki te kahore he whakatikinga ka ngaro te iwi. Without foresight or vision, the people will be lost. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Mr. Chairman, Your Worship, the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councillors, representatives of Te Tātou o Te Arawa, Community Board representatives and Council staff, ladies and gentlemen. Ko Don Patterson toku ingoa, ko Nongataha toku maunga, ko Awahau toku awa, no Rotorua ahau. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the concerned citizens of our community who took the time to sign the petition to save Rotorua's reserves. In the Local Government Act 2002, under Section 14, Principles Relating to Local Authorities, paragraph H, it states, 1. In taking sustainable development approach, a local authority should take into account the social, economic and cultural well-being of people and communities. 2, the need to maintain and enhance the quality of the environment. And 3, the reasonably foreseeable needs of future generations. These 4 well-beings are also the foundation of your very own principles. The following comments are from a cross-section of our community, real people, and reflect those 4 well-beings through the lens of their real lives. Turner Drive and Park Road, this is Kirsten. Moving out of Auckland, we bought our property in the back of a reserve for a purpose. We have 2 adult children with disabilities, and access to the community reserves offers us a close, safe place to visit on a daily basis, allowing our family a sense of freedom which supports the health and well-being that is important to our family's quality of life. Kamahi Place, a retired couple, Anne and Patrick. Kamahi Place in Linton Park West is paramount to our well-being and extremely important to our way of life. Living on the boundary of Linton Park Reserve, the beautiful outlook and safe recreational areas provide a sense of purpose for us. For us and for all residents and future generations, we urge this council to keep our green space. Kelly from Gallagher Street. This reserve belongs to the people of Rotorua and our future generations and is loved by many, and this council has no right to sell it for housing. Where will all the native birds go when the trees are gone and this reserve is built on? Lee Road, Tracy from All Seasons. We already field calls on a daily basis asking if we have homeless or emergency housing at our park. If we did, they wouldn't book with us. If we say no, but there's a property right next door that's full of them, they won't come. Simple as that. It will kill our business. Denise from High Street. We need to protect our green spaces, not just for the people for today, but for our future generations. With the coming of high-density housing throughout Rotorua, we need to future-proof our city and have spaces for families to go to and play and sit, picnic, or just have a walk. Coulter Road. Coulter Road Reserve is the beating heart at the centre of our community. Its wealth lies in the life force it has offered generations of whānau on the east side, and its memories it holds of our tupuna before us, and eventually the memories it will hold of us for our mokopuna to come. Steele's Lane. Ivan. I had to have emergency bowel cancer surgery last December. Upon return home to Steele's Lane 2 weeks later, I'd lost 9 kilos of my body weight. Each day thereafter, I walked on the reserve to build back muscle and mental strength. I believe this was and still is critical to my long-term recovery. And Jenny, also of Steele's Lane. I was and still am Ivan's support person. I was dealing with a serious issue of my own as a teacher, at the same time as supporting Ivan, which resulted in me having to take 4 weeks stress leave. I walked in the reserve 2 to 3 times a day for my own mental health, as recommended by my doctor. I needed time alone, and that, the Steele's Lane Reserve being such a big space, enabled me to do. Without such a facility, I know my mental health would not have improved, and I often wonder if I would still be here today.
10 seconds, Mr. Patterson.
We urge Rotorua Lakes Council to act now to retain the 10 identified reserves in their entirety and preserve them for the future generations by not proceeding with the Rotorua Lakes Council Reserves Revocation and Vesting Bill or any version thereof. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Councillors, we are not in a position to make a decision at this time. The consultation and hearing process needs to be completed before we deliberate. But I would like to thank the petitioners for their passion and their clear articulation of their views here today. Thank all the supporters who have come in attendance. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the confirmation of council minutes. On page 7, council minutes draft of 26th of May 2022. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the motion that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 26th of May 2022 be confirmed as a true and correct record? Moved Councillor Yates, seconded Councillor Rokawa Tate. Are there any items for correction? I will just pause for a moment while everyone leaves them. Thank you, councillors. We will resume the meeting. So it's been moved, Councillor Yates, seconded Councillor Rotorua Tate. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
There was just one item on page 13 I think deserves a little bit of attention. That is, I would like to think that we can find a way of recognising Councillor Peter Bentley's long and distinguished service to our community through his service to Council. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion's been carried. We'll move on to the next item, which is the release of confidential items on page 15.
Sorry, point of order. Can you take up my, through you, can we take up my suggestion that we deliberately honour Councillor Bentley's long and distinguished service?
So I note your comment, Councillor McPherson. I'm not quite sure what you have in mind in the way of an honour. It's not something that we will deal with in this urgent item today, but thank you for the raising it. Moving on to item 7.1, confidential items to be released on page 15 of the agenda. Can I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report, that the report confidential items to be released be received? Councillor Yates, seconded Councillor Rotorua Tate. Put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So noted. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. So recommendations from other committees on page 22. I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report that the recommendations from other committees be received. Do I have a mover? Councillor Rotorua Tate. Councillor Yates. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So the following recommendations of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee held on the 9th of June are to be adopted. Recommendation 1, the approach to Three Waters Be Better Off funding application. Mr. Gaston is available to answer any questions.
Yes, I have a question.
Are there any questions? Councillor McPherson.
Yes, thank you. The Better Off funding, there's a reference there to project evaluation and prioritisation approach. What is that approach? And secondly, what are the priorities recommended?
If I could just jump to the further down my run sheet here. The item, if we approve today, will be the subject of a follow-up in Strategy, Policy and Finance on the 14th of July, when projects will be put up for consideration. So we haven't got the projects in front of us today. This is endorsing council making application for a share of that funding. Councillor Kumar, question?
Thank you, Chairperson. Through the Chair to JP, it says over here that an application does not bind the Council to support the Three Waters reform. However, when I go to our conclusion, it says our clear intention is to be supportive and constructive in the effort to reward towards an able and sustainable Three Waters management framework. So, JP, for me, it looks like on one end, we are saying, yes, this first tranche has got nothing to do with it, that there's no sweetener, there's no binding, but then the Council's own conclusion says that, yes, we support the framework.
I suppose, through you, Mr. Chairman, that just the previous question, we presented the criteria which were explained about the fund at the item where this was recommended. We also introduced 5 other criteria which were local criteria we would use to evaluate projects. At that meeting, obviously, then we took your recommendations that those criteria, A, from the fund, and B, the additional criteria we added, would form the basis of an evaluation. So as per this report, the intention was that once we had those criteria agreed, we would come back to the next meeting with a list of projects evaluated and scored against the combined set of criteria. As we tried to be explicit during the report too, the government has been quite clear that the funding and the Be Better Off funding does not in any way fetter councils from having views on the Three Waters proposal. So whilst the funding is available, it does not in any way constrain us from having an opinion about the proposed changes.
Councillor McPherson.
Sorry, it's just a point of clarification. I appreciate your answer, and it could well be those criteria and the recommendations were tabled at SPNF, from which I'm banned, as you know.
Point of order, he is not banned from the SPNF.
That point is disputed, obviously, but I'll leave that. And if I might move on to my question.
Move on with the question.
Point of clarification on how we're going to deal with the debate today on Three Waters. Will there be an opportunity for me to make a statement concerning Three Waters?
So Council's position on the Three Waters reform is further down our agenda today. So we'll be discussing.
And I'll have an opportunity then to speak.
It's not part of this item here.
Thank you very much.
Mayor Chadwick.
Sorry?
Yep, we've got you now. You have a question?
It wasn't a question. I was just very comfortable with the decisions reached at the committee meeting prior to council. They were very clear on the clarification of the criteria, and it was not predicated to our position on Three Waters. That was made perfectly clear.
Yep. Thank you, Your Worship. Are there any other questions? So I would ask for a mover and a seconder for the motions that 1, Council notes that A, Rotorua District is entitled to 8.05 million in the first tranche of the Three Waters Be Better Off Fund. B, that an application must be made by September 2022. C, that making an application does not bind the Council to support the Three Waters reform. 2, that Council supports a RLC application to the first tranche of the Three Waters Be Better Off Fund. 3, that Council supports the project evaluation and prioritisation approach proposed in this report. Moved Councillor Maxwell, seconder Councillor Yates. Is there any discussion on the item? Appears to be none. I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
A division, please.
You want your vote recorded against?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I actually asked for a division, Chair.
Sorry?
I actually asked for a division. That is, that the votes be recorded.
All those in favour, please raise your right hand. All those against, please raise your right hand. Councillor McPherson, Councillor Kumar. The motion is carried. Move on. Recommendation 2 on page 23, delegation of authority for the Chief Executive to approve contract 22/028, construction of Moray Street flood detention dams and wetland. And Stavros is available to answer any questions or points of clarification. Do we have any questions on this one? Well covered in...
I'd like to move.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. I note you'd like to move that one.
Seconded.
Seconded, Councillor McPherson. So we have a mover and a seconder for the motion that Council approve the delegation of authority for the Chief Executive to approve contract 22/028, construction of Moray Street flood dams and wetland. Any discussion? Being none, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Recommendation 2, appointment to the Tarawera Awa Restoration Group. We have Gina Rangi on Zoom, available to answer any questions. Are there any questions or any points of clarification for the motion that Council appoints Councillor Merapeka Raukawa Tate as the Rotorua Lakes Council representative to the Tarawera Awa Restoration Group? Are you moving, Councillor Maxwell? Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Yates, second. Is there any discussion or any questions? I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, councillors. Now, continuing on the same. This page. Right, staff reports, page 24. Recommendation 1, to adopt the long-term plan Year 2 delivery 2022-23. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report, adopt long-term plan Year 2 delivery, the plan?
So we've got the...
Thank you. Moved Mayor Chadwick, seconded Councillor Raukawa Tate. Una, or Thomas?
No, we just need to receiving it.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Just to receive the report, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And it's Thomas to present. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and good morning, councillors and your worship. I will shock you today that I don't have a presentation. This is a topic that we have been traversing for several months now, and I have presented several times. However, I will just briefly talk to a bit of a summary. So what we are talking about is the annual plan for Year 2 of the LTP, and obviously we're just in the process of the final day of the current Year 1 of the LTP. This journey around reviewing the budgets and setting the budgets for Year 2 started about 5 to 6 months ago, so not short after we actually adopted the long-term plan. And just a reminder that the key focus of the long-term plan was on enabling homes and thriving communities, focusing on community safety. Those were two strong pillars undermining our long-term plan. Economic development in light of the current environment with regards to COVID and the things that the world is currently experiencing. Climate change, and in particular you will see the discussion around the organic waste and enabling infrastructure. On top of that, it was around finishing what we started and around some key amenities being completed, such as the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre, and etc. So what we did is we looked at Year 2 of the budgets and we reviewed that against the priorities and did a scan around what was happening in our environment, and we felt that at the time the priorities that were set were still valid, were still topical, and that there was no change of that. And so what we did do was work within an environment of the rates increase that was proposed in Year 2 of the LTP, which was 5.7%. About $140 million capital works program, with a significant portion of that being invested into the completion of key infrastructure and supported by approximately $80 million worth of debt. I will remind the councillors that this is a budget that has a rates increase well below CPI, and what we have talked about before is that CPI is not really applicable to us because CPI is the headline inflation, and underneath that all the different drivers, we are actually experiencing much higher cost increases than what that CPI would indicate. And we have talked to you previously about what we are seeing now in some of our contracts, 20 to 30% increases in that. And remind you again of what we talked about at the last SPNF, where I think the Daily Post showed that example of construction costs in the Rotorua, where I think the lowest increase across materials was something like 15%, and the highest were obviously much higher. This is the environment that we currently are in, and so just reminding you of the fact that the 5.7% rates increase does not reflect an inflation increase across our cost base, so we will be asking our organisation to do more with less. We do inflate some key contracts where we're legally required to do so, but the organisation will be carrying the risk of significant inflation by trying to mitigate those effects within the existing framework. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Thomas. Do we have any questions for Thomas? Councillor Kaifong.
Thanks, Chair. Thomas, you mentioned that it's been 5 to 6 months when you last reviewed the budget for the Year 2 delivery, and I note that in the actual report itself it talked about the unforeseen or the extraordinary circumstances that we're facing, and since then probably the inflation headline has been exacerbated, construction costs have gone up, the Great Resignation that had been referred to for quite some time. So given that these things are not going to go away anytime soon and interest rate costs are continuing to increase, have we done anything to try and take that into account? Because the headline message in the LTP document was, let's stay the direction. It's essential for us to do that, but we need to acknowledge the world around us is changing, but we haven't appeared to have done that in terms of the budget and what we're trying to deliver.
The same challenges, and we'll respond the same way that we are. We will review our procurement practices, we will review the timing of when we go to market, we may have to spend more to do some certain critical things, and we may have to defer other items as a result. What that looks like, if you were to ask me what that looks like today, I don't know, because the world is forever changing. What I do know is I have confidence in this organisation that when these issues come up, we will work through them and address them, just like everyone else in New Zealand and the world is currently having to do as well.
Thank you, Thomas. Mayor Chadwick, you had a question?
I did. Thomas, could you just give us an indication of how our debt to equity is tracking?
From memory, Your Worship, I think our net debt position is about 280 million as of today, and that's 280 million against an asset base of approximately 1.5 billion.
So we still have headroom?
Just a reminder that our borrowing headroom is tied to our income, and we still have sufficient headroom. And you'll recall during the discussions previously in my presentations where I did show a graph and showing that over the next 3 to 4 years we do close in on that debt limit but don't exceed it, and that's a reflection of the significant investment that's in front of us, particularly around supporting things like the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, etc.
Thank you.
Councillor Kumar, followed by Councillor Tapsell.
Through the chair, good morning, Thomas. Thomas, just a couple of things. There are some good elements in the long-term plan that I'd like to support, like finishing some of the unfinished projects. But my gripe is with regards to roading in the rural areas. Having visited that, and I know it's a bugbear, I always keep asking questions about rural roading, whether there's funding on it or not. And my other concern is with regards to a portion in here which says that councils no longer need to require to consult on annual plans unless there's significant or material differences from the LTP. Consultation is no longer a special consultative procedure. I mean, if we saw this morning, we are seeing more and more people coming out now because they are either not happy with the way.
Is there a question in
Yeah,
there,
that's the question. So the question is, what is our consultative procedure? Because we are seeing more and more people protesting now through other petitions, getting on the road. Is the council's consultative procedures not connecting to the public?
I'll just I'll cut Una off here. I'll just remind the councillors that while there wasn't an obligation to consult on year 2 of the LTP, we did. And we went out to the community for a 4-week period. We had open forums where the community could come to the library, and I did present to one of those myself. The second one I didn't because of a poor turnout. I think Una carried the torch for me on my behalf that day. And we also took feedback online. And just as a reminder, at the SPNF, we only had 14 submissions on our plan, and of those submissions, most of those points were actually off topic. Why that is, we don't know, but we did go through a very thorough consultation process.
You have a supplementary question?
Through the chair, my supplementary is, so in saying that there was a poor turnout, I go back to my question. Is the council's consultative procedures working then?
So just a reminder that the process was online, in person, and I think through media channels as well. So we saturated multiple media channels and gave people the opportunity to submit in multiple different forms, not just the traditional. So I will leave it to you as to determine, as to, considering we went through all the channels available to us, why there was such a low poor turnout. I'm not sure what else we could have done.
And bearing in mind we were in a pandemic at the time of LTP consultation. Councillor Tapsell, your question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my apologies, my voice isn't very good at the moment, but I did just have 2 questions. First question, just around page 12 and the government reforms. Now, these will have a significant impact on our organisation and also our residents. But there's only a short paragraph in the LTP Year 2. So I just wonder if we can also include in that community discussions to signal that when those reforms do come up, we will actually take that opportunity to go out and inform the community about what's about to happen and see what their perspective is. Because when we look at the 3 waters, that opportunity hasn't happened, but also around local government reforms too. I think it's important that when we show a Rotorua voice into these reforms, that's actually backed by our residents. So that's my first question.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that has in relation to adopting a Year 2 plan. All I do know is that at the moment, with regards to those reforms, the government still hasn't provided a lot of information, and when that information is made available, I'm sure there'll definitely be discussions with the councillors and the communities on those impacts, but at the moment they're a little bit unknown.
And I think I'll ask Una to add to that response.
Through you, Chair. So just to thank you, Councillor Tapsell, for raising those concerns. I think just as a bit of a clarification, we are preparing currently the pre-election report, and contained within that is intended to be a further conversation in particular around the reforms and the opportunities for the community to be involved as they progress. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Una. And then my second question was just in support of what Councillor Kaifong has actually asked this morning around the need of potential changes to priorities. And my question was just what changes, if any, were made to that, because we have had feedback from the community. It certainly is a hard time for people with the cost of living, but there's a clear direction in this LTP Year 2, which I don't believe all elected members agree with, that we must continue on. And as Thomas has mentioned this morning, other organisations, other industries that are also facing these challenges of increased inflation and staff retention, and they are making changes, but I can't see that clearly in this document.
Do you want to comment? Yep. So, the Chief Executive, comment.
Thank you. Through the Chair. You'll recall that during the workshops and then subsequently during the SPNF deliberations on this plan, the discussion was really highlighted that the organisation is under significant pressure. We didn't receive any direction from you to cut or reduce services and therefore reduce costs. We instead actually received a direction from you to actually maintain existing services and therefore to manage the organisation in a way which actually attempts to balance pressures on inflation against actually the need to deliver existing services that we actually provide. So that's what Thomas has highlighted. That's the approach that will be taken over the next 12 months period. The changes that we have taken place has also been highlighted by Thomas. We are continuing to closely monitor where our costs sit. We're closely looking at how we procure services. We're looking at all of our staffing vacancies where they exist to ensure that they are we are actually where we are filling positions, they're in the right place and delivering the right things. So in other words, we've got an ongoing program of managing costs in the organisation, and that, if you'll recall, has been the traditional way that we have actually responded to pressures from outside the organisation. Over the last 12 months, you'll be aware that there's been a huge cost pressure on the organisation, yet you're not seeing large variations at the moment on our bottom line achievement for this current financial year. We're not going to be as well positioned as what we'd ideally like to be. Normally, we're within 1% of our budget. That's our normal pattern. This year, we will be a little outside of that, but not significantly. So the approach has always been one of proactively managing our cost base through the mechanisms that I've previously outlined, whilst maintaining services. There may be a point at some point in the future, and the next council may elect to do this, where there is an examination of the nature of delivery that we are currently providing, and a question mark as to, do we start decreasing the things that this organisation is fundamentally doing? And through that, there obviously would be the ability to further reduce cost. But that was not the direction that you provided to us at any stage during the deliberations or the workshops that have been undertaken.
Thank you very much for your response. Although there were myself and other councillors that have signalled that we weren't comfortable with the rates increase, and also that we needed to relook at their priorities. So it's not correct to say that that direction wasn't given. But I do acknowledge your response. Thank you.
And the Chief Executive would like to respond to that comment.
Sorry, I needed to be possibly more clear, and my apologies for this, Councillor Tapsell. My comments were that there is always debate in the council, and councillors put forward a range of different views. The resolution of SPNF were really clear as to what it is that we were proceeding with. And the debate that happened around SPNF, there were clearly a large range of views, but at the end of the day, the final vote was what gave the organisation the direction to proceed against, and that's what's been presented here today.
Thank you, Jeff. Councillor McPherson, you have a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. If I might respond, I acknowledge that the majority of councillors did provide directions, which has been faithfully followed by the Chief Executive and his staff. To me, that's not the key issue. I'd like to go back, if I could, to the nature of the consultations, and you indicated that there was 14 submissions, that some were off topic. But my question to you is that how was the submission by over 1,000 residents and ratepayers weighted if it was one of those 14 submissions? And the point that I'm making here is that there's a great deal on the long-term plan year 2 that is supported, but there are many components of it which are not. And that's come through in various forms from councillors, but it was certainly set out with some precision in the submission by the residents and ratepayers. So how was that submission of over 1,000 people weighted, or was it simply deemed to be off topic?
I think to be fair, that's more of a political question, Councillor McPherson.
No,
The waiting is we all read your submission, the submission of 22 pages, as I recall. So it was all read and assessed and given whatever rating elected members felt was appropriate. So that's more a political question. Your point of order?
My point of order is that along the lines of with Councillor Reynold McPherson has asked, I asked about the same consultative process because when...
What is your point of order?
My point of order is the communication.
That's not a point of order.
So...
Well, we will have discussion on this later if you want to make a statement, Councillor. Yes,
if I may, can I reserve the right to make a statement prior to the vote being taken on this recommendation?
Yes, indeed. We'll have a round of discussion.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Are there any further questions of Thomas? Councillor Kaifong.
Just one further question then, because just in response to what Jeff has just mentioned around the maintaining services, which was the policy effectively, I think you said, Thomas, was to do more with less. But we can't do that with the capital expenditure, and I support the fact that we do need to carry on completing projects, but we've also got in here projects that haven't they're partly started, like the museum, and it states in the document that work will be started, and I understood that it was still subject to further funding to be obtained.
That is correct with regards to the museum, and I understand a more thorough update is on its way to O&M with regards to the future pathway and the decision points. We are in the process of completing the detailed design, which would then allow us to go to tender for a construction company. However, before that, there's some funding challenges to resolve, and therefore there's some touch points and decision points that the council will need to make going forward. And some of those will likely be the new council post the election.
And just one further question, if I may, and it's just around the fact there is another item coming up, which I won't refer to the actual item, but basically we're being asked to agree to contracts, not knowing what actual costs will be because of the current environment and the lack of construction firms wishing to actually provide fixed price contracts. So isn't that a difficulty where we're going into all of this capital expenditure without prioritising what we really want to do, because we don't really know what the cost is going to be for these projects now?
I guess, councillors, I'll remind you that prioritisation did take place as part of the LTP deliberations. There's nothing in our capital works program that wasn't deemed essential by our community, and that was revised again as part of this process. There were multiple workshops and multiple meetings for you to give us that direction as to whether you felt that there shouldn't be something in there, and we never got that direction. So,
thank you, Thomas. Are there any final questions before I ask for a mover and a seconder that Council adopts the long-term plan Year 2, Delivery 2022-23, and notes that the plan shows commitment to continuing the direction set in the long-term plan 2021-2031. Do I have a mover?
The Mayor.
Move to worship. Seconder, I'll second. Is there any discussion? Councillor McPherson. Yep. So as mover, Your Worship, would you like to speak first? Thank you.
Steve, we need to...
You need to unmute, Your Worship.
Thank you. And I want to congratulate Thomas for getting this report to us in good time, which will be well received by our audit office. And also the support of the executive team. This is particularly trying circumstances for our district. We all acknowledge that, and we've heard part of it this morning. People will come out and speak when they are concerned, but for the development of Year 2 of the long-term plan, it was an amazingly low level of community concern expressed, even in these really hard times. I also feel very comfortable with the way in which officers have brought to us the need to consider changes to planning that we are facing in the next few years and the incoming council will place. And that's when we look at contracts on a variance basis. But for us, I'm very happy that we kept and held our line that housing was our top priority, community safety and well-being, and also investment in infrastructure. And those are the three core legs of the stool of year 2 of our long-term plan. And we should be proud of that we've held our nerve, and we've also been able to hold rates at what is a level that is not eye-watering when you look at neighbouring councils. And so we have taken into account the cost of living pressures on our community. And I believe that that is something that we took in an environment when we knew starting this back in December that we were facing a very rocky time ahead. So I congratulate the executive team and yourself, Jeff. The workshops were very open and informative, and we guided the development of year 2 of our long-term plan. We gave policy direction to the executive that have kept up with the plan. And I do just want to say, when I see concerns about inflation and rising costs, that there is nothing in terms of service delivery that I see that we can cut for the well-being and the benefit of our ratepayers. And of course, we'd all like to do more, but rates would go up proportionately if we wanted to do more, especially for those in our rural community that want to stretch service delivery further out there. And I think we've been very constrained about what is affordable and what we can achieve in this next year. I do just also want to touch on the reforms, and the reforms will come to us. They will come to us when there's an actual bill for us to consider as a councillor and as council for our submission back to central government. And we've been active participants on the impact of reforms, and that's had an impact also on the council team and the executive team, who have been really stretched to participate, and the need for us to fund consultants to assist us in furthering our position, especially in the three waters and housing. So well done, team. Nobody likes to see rates go up, but people will bark when services are cut. So I'm fully supportive of this year 2 of the long-term plan, and I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Worship. Councillor McPherson, you signalled.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want my comments not to be construed in any sense to be a criticism of the Chief Executive or his senior officials. I agree with the Mayor that they have been faithful in taking the wishes of the majority and running those through into the year 2 delivery plan. My contest, my concern is with the majority view here on council, that we have, in a sense, uplifted year 2 from the LTP, as we did with year 1, and claimed that there was no material changes from what was signalled in the LTP, and therefore this to me is an undesirable practice because it precludes learning that can be derived from a very strict evaluation of the key proposals in year 2. It's also the antithesis of democracy for me, when so many people are so concerned that they will subscribe to a submission. Over 1,000 people said this approach has got to change, and yet there is essentially no change at all. She says it's not enough for us as councillors to simply reiterate the need to remain committed to 5 key strategies in a context in which they were conceived happened long, long ago. The context has changed dramatically in all sorts of ways, and we have made very little change to our appreciation of appropriate strategies. If I look back to 2013 and so on from there, it seems to me, and to many of the people that contributed to that submission by over 1,000 people, that the commitment to many projects, many more projects than we perhaps should have, and then further exacerbated by the rapidly changing conditions, that the risk taken at that stage was to grow with borrowings, using borrowings. And in this context, many of these residents and ratepayers are deeply disappointed that in this context of multiple crises and acute risks, yet another opportunity to cut expenditure, cut debt, has been missed. There has been virtually no change to Council's direction, as given by this Year 2 delivery plan. Priorities remain pretty much the same, while almost everything else has changed. To those people, it is a grossly imprudent strategy. Thank you.
If anyone else would like to speak? Councillor Kumar. Sorry, Councillor Tapsell was first, then yep. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and apologies, I have to raise it in this meeting, but it is the first time it was on the agenda for me to see it, and that's just on I had an issue with what's on page 4 of the Mayor's message, and I found it actually quite disappointing, the comments that which say we have heard the noise to cut the spend and reduced rates. I reject that that's noise. I think that's both ignorant and disrespectful to the many locals that are struggling with the cost of living crisis. But because it's in a document that comes, that is given to the community on behalf of the Rotorua Lakes Council, I just wanted to signal that it's not noise, and we shouldn't be disregarding the views of so many in our community.
Mr. Chairman, can I just comment that noise is actually quite a common word that you'll find in a lot of papers these days, actually particularly by the government.
Thank you, Councillor Rotorua. Councillor Kumar, your comments?
Thank you. If you go back to the SPNF, I believe at that time Reynolds wasn't here, but I voted against it. So I don't know how many voted for it, but I voted against it because I said at that day as well, while I support some of the programs, I do not support the underlying overspend that I can continuously see in light of what's happened in the last 2-3 years. I cannot believe that we keep promising the rural community that there's a lot in the bucket for them when really the bucket's quite empty. Because when I go over and talk to them and listen to them, they have a different scope. And they demand more for what they're getting for what the rates they are paying. I mean, we've all said it. Some of us will agree wholeheartedly or probably change their tune today. Doesn't really matter. From where I can see it over here is there's, while we need to, we've seen today the groundswell of people over and over again. Our consultative procedures are not working. Maybe because when people are sending the same email 400 times, it is looked upon as one, but behind them are 400 people. And we don't take that into account. So when we say that only 14 people have objected, no. Behind the 14 people are another 200 people that have sent the same message, but it was been disregarded. And it's been shown as very minuscule response. So, look, I just hope from where I see that sanity prevails and that we come in light with what's happening in the community. A lot of people are struggling. The cost of living's gone up sky high. We need to finish our projects. We need to not have so many grandiose projects on the show that is going to cause more burden. Some people sometimes put it as simply as, oh, it's only another cup of coffee. Not everybody can afford a latte or a flat white at a Flash Cafe.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Rotorua, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Look, obviously we're living in tough times. There's no doubt about that. But that doesn't mean that we pull our head in and do nothing. We've got to keep on with the job. And our LTP actually clearly shows that we've got work to do. So, you know, I want to support this. I mean, I've enjoyed the workshops and the discussions that have led up to this. We're not a groupthink council. We have some diverse and some rigorous debate around this table, and that's as it should be. That's as it should be. But we are a diverse community, and I always try to look and see who's not in the room. The people that don't put the submissions in. And they don't put the submissions in, but they're in our community, and they expect councillors to know what their issues are. I do get out and about. I'm not always going to listen to those who believe I'm more knowledgeable, we're better informed, we're more entitled to be heard. I always try to listen to the voices that are not in the room, because I can tell you they're the ones that are doing it particularly tough. They believe that this council will also want to hear what their voice is. So I would say, don't always look at the ones who write the submissions. Don't always look at the people who really believe that they're more entitled to be heard. There are people in our community that will never say anything because they expect councillors to know. And this long-term plan is for everyone. So we've got to keep on with the job, and I thank you, Jeff, you and your team, for taking the direction that we have set, because we've got significant issues in our community and we have to go forward. We cannot pull the plug and just say, oh, well, when things get better. We've got to ensure that they get better and do our job. So I do support our long-term plan. And I thank you, Your Worship, for reminding us in speaking to our long-term plan, how far we've come, but my goodness, how far we have to go. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor O'Kawate. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Chair. Nei rā te mihi ki wā tātou hunga mahi. So I'd like to acknowledge our officers, as well as yourself, Jeff, me te puku mahi, for all of your hard work bringing this here today. If I reflect back on the last 2 years, when we first started scouting out what our long-term plan would be, we were right in the thick of a global pandemic. Our community identified projects that restored hope. We had this hall filled today with people who believed that their reserves gave them hope. I can't believe that I'm hearing today us challenging and questioning decisions that we have had month upon month brought before us when it comes to our long-term plan year 2. The dreams and aspirations of projects that we have listed in our year 2 document have been populated across our community. It could also be said that whilst we only had 14 submissions, clearly that was possibly an indication that our community were happy with what we were proposing and what we were endeavouring to do as an elected council for the betterment of our Rotorua district. So I am surprised to hear some of the comments coming up today. It does sound a little bit like electioneering. So I would like to say that I'm in full support of the Year 2 document going forward as proposed by our council. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. Councillor Kaifong, you wish to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just following on from what Councillor O'Kawate said, that yes, we do need to listen to the community, and it's not about how many people come and write a formal submission. We do know, you just need to read the Daily Post, that people in this community are hurting, and they're hurting really badly. And, you know, they're the ones that are having to tighten their belt. They're the ones that have to make sure that they've got their income matches their expenditure. And for us to simply say we're just going to carry on spending money without looking at what's coming in the door and what's going out, I think is either arrogant or naive. We've said, as Councillor Yates says, yes, we started this process when we were in a pandemic, but since then we've had huge interest rate increases, we've had construction costs go skyrocketing, we've had the Great Resignation, we've had inflation which has been as high as it's never been before, and yet we still don't want to do anything about it. We're simply saying in this message, carry on as normal, it'll be right. Well, it won't be right, and I don't think that we should just be continuing on, and that is why I have a difficulty with the motion that's on the table, where it's got 2 parts to it. The first is that we adopt the Year 2 delivery, but the second part says that we show a commitment to continuing the direction set, and it's that bit that I don't necessarily agree with. I think that in terms of finishing some projects like the lakefront and the Sir Howard Morrison. Yes, we definitely need to go on and do that. I think it's going to be difficult for this organisation, and we're asking our staff to do a lot, where we say, carry on doing more, but we're going to give you less to do it. We have to look at how we can do things better, smarter. In terms of the priorities for the spending, whilst we may have headroom now in terms of our borrowing, we don't know where interest rates are going, we don't know what construction costs are going to be for some of the other projects. You know, we need to take these things into account. So I support parts of the Year 2 delivery, and there are other parts that I don't, and I don't support the part of the motion that says that we simply commit to continuing the direction set in the long-term plan for the rest of the 10-year period. So it would be, unfortunately, that I would have to vote against the motion.
Councillor Maxwell, do you want to speak? I signal I will speak, but we'll go around the room. So Councillor Maxwell, then Councillor Wing.
Koa. Hi. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For me, I'm supporting the long-term plan, and yes, and I've tried to attend many of the workshops. We even get accused that we're doing that in secret, you know. If we were a team, we'd be defending some of the things that are being said about our own council. But unfortunately, some don't. So it's not a team approach. So you go for the majority approach. And the majority, thank goodness, are not sitting on their hands. They've decided that we're going to do the best we can for our community, and I think we've done well. For some who raise, it's only an opinion. I've heard the 1,000 people 4 times in one speech earlier. Well, pretty, you know, I've found the same people ignore the 25,000 of Ngāti Whakaue who might put forward something. They'll ignore that. So anyway, it's just an opinion and it's not mine. Yeah, and to me, yes, I'm not trying to be too critical sometimes when it's said that there's noise out there, but if some people are unhappy, of course there'll be noise, but it's what they believe. We have a housing problem and it's a crisis. I never heard that being raised this morning in the balance of the debate. So for me, when the time gets tough, the tough get going. I'm voting in favour of the LTP. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Firstly, I just want to touch on the subject raised by Councillor Kumar around the rural community. As the councillor representative on the rural community board, on the Rotorua Rural Community Board, I can assure him and assure others around the table that the Rural Community Board works incredibly hard to advocate for the rural community. They do an incredible amount of work with council staff, with other organisations, Bay of Plenty Regional Council, Waka Kotahi, to get a lot of that work done. They don't just make noise when it suits them. They actually are on the ground delivering, they're on the ground working with council officers and getting the message across that the rural community is there, and it is incredibly important in Rotorua when 80% of our zoned land is rural. So I just wanted to put that out there, and tautoko Ms. Trumper sitting there as well, and the rest of the members of the Rural Community Board. I've seen how hard they work, and it's greatly appreciated. On the subject here today, I, after heavily considering it, I agree with those comments that we have been discussing this, we have been debating it, putting this together over the past few months, but actually it's been going on, as the title, Year 2. It's been going on for, 2 years, even longer than that. We are in an incredibly tough time, and we are having to make some incredibly tough decisions as well. There are some aspects of it that I do have concerns about, but like I said before, we're having to make some incredibly tough decisions right now. And for me, the risk of under-delivering and the risk of not completing some of these essential projects and investment far outweighs the not even giving this a consideration and vetoing this. Following on from Councillor Raukawa Tate's comments, the majority of our community, and I've read the 22-page submission. We take all of that into account, but we also take into account our future generation, the children who definitely do not have, are not literate to the jargon that we use here. The future generations that we are making, that the decisions that we make will have an impact on, as mentioned by some of the submitters today with the petition. The decisions that we make today will have a very significant impact on our future generations, and we absolutely should not take that for granted. These projects, this investment into our community, I've talked to many people within the community while using council facilities, and many of them do not submit to any consultation. Many of them do not engage in any of this, but they're the ones that do use these facilities. They're the ones in the community. They're part of our community. And when I talk to them about these projects, and when I talk to them about the investment into our infrastructure, into our wastewater, stormwater, drinking water, all of this, they understand that, we are in an incredibly tough environment, but these are decisions that actually have to be made. And when you actually look at...
You've got 15 seconds, Councillor Wayne.
When you actually look at all this investment that we're making, it is looking towards the future, and these are decisions that our future generations, intergenerational assets, mokopuna decisions. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. And just a couple of quick comments from me before I pass to Her Worship for a right of reply, as I know she has to depart shortly. Look, I fully am in support of the Year 2 delivery plan. I think of a neighbouring council who are putting their rates up 13.7% on average, and have been warned by the Auditor General that that level of funding will not deliver everything they have in their plan. I think this council has been measured. We've evaluated project by project. I hear people saying we should be doing something about the blue baths sitting over there. Well, we've mothballed that one. We've parked that one. People are shouting for us to do more about community safety and restoring Rotorua. Well, I think, how are we going to do that? We also face the issue of staff retention, and without the appropriate level of funding, I've heard comments that how do we address the overspend? I haven't heard of an overspend in our ops and monitoring reports. So I'm in full support of this being a balanced plan. The long-term plan is all about long-term thinking of a council, and we have to hold our nerve and think long-term, and I endorse Year 2 delivery of the long-term plan. Your Worship, I invite you to have a right of reply.
Well, I've been heartened, Mr Chair, about the comments that I've heard this morning. I'm well aware of those that are are concerned about year 2 of the long-term plan tends to be those of us that are going on to retirement. But I'm heartened by the voices of our young councillor this morning, and thank you very much, Councillor Wang. It is about our future. It's about investment in our children and the mokopuna, and that's why we have to have a visionary and a bold journey that we embark on. We can fret about the pennies as we go, but it's the investment in a future that makes our place a great place for people to want to come and invest, live here, work and play. And we forget that. You've only just got to get away from Rotorua, as I am over here in Melbourne, to see that the pressures globally are absolutely crushing globally. And we're not alone. And I love the fact that the majority of us on council set a vision, and you've been steadfast. And that is the very important role that a councillor must undertake. We weren't elected to actually go soft at the knees. We were elected to represent our community and to actually shape our place and all of the services and all of the infrastructure that matter about our future. And I believe this long-term plan year 2 is absolutely spot on. I don't worry about the noise. I do hear the noise, and I think the noise overwhelmingly says to me when I'm out and about, we love this place. I've been out over Matariki, I've been out in the forest and out walking, and you all know where I live, and I feel that this community has a fantastic future. It only has a fantastic future when we as a team work together. And I don't mind dissenting voices. I just want to finish here. I think often you remind us that there are some things that we need to focus on more sharply. But we need to work together and be proud of the work that we've done. And I'm therefore very, very proud to support our long-term plan year 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. So the resolution that Council adopts the long-term plan year 2 delivery 2022-23 and notes the plan shows a commitment to continuing the direction set in the long-term plan 2021-2031. It's been moved by Her Worship, seconded by myself. All those in favour, please raise your right hand. All those against?
Can we have that recorded, please, a division?
Yeah, I'll record that as a division. So 3 votes against and at 4. Noted, Councillor Tapsell, thank you. And the motion is carried. Recommendation 2, setting council rates for the year 1 July 2022 to 30 June 2023. It's on page 27 of the agenda. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Moved Her Worship, seconded Councillor Yates. All those in favour receiving the report, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thomas, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, following on the previous decision, we now ask you to approve the adoption of the rates so that the team can go forth and strike the rates in the system and work towards issuing the first set of rates instalments due in August.
Thank you, Thomas. Are there any questions of Thomas? Your Worship.
Not a question, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to move the motion that falls in line with our previous discussion.
I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
And seconded Councillor Rokawa Tate. I'll read the motion. Are there no questions? I'll read the motion. That Council, in accordance with Section 23 of the Local Government Rating Act 2022, sets the rates as set out in the Rates Funding Impact Statement. In accordance with Section 24 of the Local Government Rating Act 2002, sets the dates by which rates must be paid as set out in the Rates Funding Impact Statement. and in accordance with sections 57 and 58 of the Local Government Rating Act 2002, set the penalties that may be added to unpaid rates as set out in the rates funding impact statement, and set the discount for early payment at 2%. It's been moved by Her Worship, seconded by Councillor Rotorua Tate. Is there any discussion? Councillor McPherson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you, it's the continuing concern that the rates funding impact analysis is conducted without a serious appraisal of the affordability of rates increases to our citizens. And I deeply regret that after nearly 3 years of protesting, the approach that's being used does not look at the impact of rates increases on residents and ratepayers. Thank you.
Are there any other comments anyone wishes to make? So it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? We want a division. All right. Everyone, all those in favour, please raise your right hand. All those against, please raise your right hand. Motion is carried. Recommendation 3. Yes, it will be recorded. Recommendation 3, Three Waters Reform Position Refresh. Actually, this will take some time, so thank you, Una. We'll have a break for a cup of tea, and we will resume at 11:20.
Through the chair,
Yes, Your Worship.
Considering. I think the questions at the very end that he raises are pertinent about do we go to our community over our response. I'm very happy with the response because I think we've been very detailed as we've gone, and he will outline that. The issue of going to the community rather than leaving it for the community to respond when the bill is tabled, I think a future government, a future council will need to consider the cost of whether you want to consult with our community. I share the concerns that have been raised in Mr. Michael's report. We have such an unknown, so many unknowns that we are facing, and the intent is something that we all support. We're just not sure of the journey to get there, and we're not sure of the cost impact on our community. So I think that is a decision for a future council, but I think it's very important that it came here today because fellow councillors raised in our leadership team what is our refreshed council position. So I'm going to have to leave for that discussion, but I look forward to hearing what you collectively decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Safe travels. Ka kite. Thank you, councillors. We'll adjourn till 11:20. So recommendation 3, Three Waters Reform Position Refresh, page 56 of our agenda. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Moved Councillor Yates, seconded Councillor Rotorua Tate. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So we have invite Stavros to speak to a presentation. Thank you. Welcome, Stavros. Thank you.
Morena, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say on the outset that obviously I am cognizant of the significant community interest in these proposed Three Waters reforms, the varying views in the reforms, and this presentation really it is based on a number of facts which are processes carried by the government at this point in time and contains a number of views, my views, and I suppose from our executive team, our point of view. Of course, those views and advice to elected members are made on the basis of my personal qualifications, experience in the sector, and the way I am networked, within the national framework for Three Waters managers. So give you my best, advice. I do not pretend that this view is infallible. I do not pretend that, that the advice or the recommendations and the comments I will make, are not open for some discussion. And I want to acknowledge straightforward that the final position on those reforms and the course of action that might be taken is entirely up to the mandated privilege of elected members, i.e. yourselves representing the community. So I will do my best to give an update as to what I know and what is happening, and then of course from there I'll be more than happy to respond to any questions you may have, and then you would have this, your own debate to consider from there. So starting with, again, the purpose here is a quick update, and obviously to highlight what decisions have been made in the recent future, especially with the September 2021 preliminary position that has taken. The Three Waters stated reforms drivers, from the government's perspective are outlined there. I see those things as positioned in a way that obviously no reasonable or rational person would come and say, I disagree with it. Who would disagree that we want to achieve improved health or improved environmental outcomes, or to support economic growth, or to support housing and so on? These are statements that really are designed in a way to leverage universal support towards an objective, and obviously we are supportive of these objectives. Government, in order to assess the current framework of Three Waters management across the country, in relation to those earlier objectives, has made a diagnosis of the problem and have identified a number of areas which listed in front of you. The safety of and quality of drinking water is not universally assured. The resiliency of Three Waters and services is at risk due to deteriorating asset condition and financial sustainability and affordability of the services, and a number of other areas, for example, that raise a health risk to the community. I have to say on the upfront is that when you watch a lot of the government statements and advertisements about the actual states on the impact of especially drinking and sewage management in the country directly onto the community, to some degree it's overstated. For example, there is a significant direction which says that the health of the community is under imminent threat. I do not believe there is no substantial evidence to justify that. I think generally the population of New Zealand demonstrates little evidence of a massive health risk in terms of running to the hospital with intense or acute health problems arising from the quality of drinking water. There are incidences, of course, and there are some of the communities, especially in the rural areas where they are not really governed by public reticulation schemes, that are not registered, and the knowledge about the quality of water in those areas is a bit, it's a bit sketchy at the moment. But if you look into the actual considerations for health risks, really are not, in my opinion, straightly evidence in front of that. However, that is not going to distract from the fact that if drinking water and sewage are not managed well, they can pose significant health problems. Again, they have stated that because of the historical condition of various assets that provide those services, there is an escalating operational and capital expenditure risk faced by the community, with leading in constrained affordability at a local level. Also, they have identified that in the diagnosis that there is the way we managing those services by 67 local authorities, it does not optimize a finite resource in that area in the best possible way. I also highlight that in many areas we've got some inconsistent standards and transparency in terms of providing community accountability. Now, to a large degree, the question revolves around having carried a diagnosis about what the problem, which largely are not inconsistent with the diagnosis that most of us in the profession are doing in terms of highlighting risks. Then the government has come up with a proposed cure to those problems, to those issues. And they, as you know, was well known that they're proposing now the creation of 4 water services entities to be responsible for the 3 waters. They propose to transfer all assets into those entities. That the local authorities would jointly own those entities. Presentation. Now, the flow of that is that the inherent resources in each TLA will consolidate their expertise and skills for water services entities, and they will create scale efficiencies, and obviously that will encourage and support the career path for those skills resources. Again, government's cure proposes a complete separation of the balance sheet from the TLAs to optimize funding strategies. And of course, that is primarily going to be achieved through allowing those water service entities to achieve a revenue to debt ratio much higher than the councils are using at the moment as potential debt limits. On average, we use it 250% or revenue to debt ratio. They propose it to leverage that up to 800%. Basically, they will allow these entities to borrow a lot more money than councils are allowed under their protection debt limits. Also, they propose to have a central regulator that will establish some baseline standards that everybody has to adhere to. And of course, that will be from a framework, a regulatory system to monitor the water services entities into their performance and how they are accountable to the community. So that is the cure. Again, schematically, that's what's the summary proposal for entities A, B, C, D. Entity that applies to our region is the entity B. It comprises about 22 TLAs and a catchment population of about 800,000 people. I do not know. I tried to find out how many iwi entities are involved into that entity B, and have not been able to find any of representatives or appointments from the TLAs and 50% by the various iwi entities that comprise that particular catchment area. I'm not entirely sure about the number of iwi into that area. So these are well-known facts. The initial governance proposal for this WSCs is there to, there will be 22 TLAs participating to that, forming, the entity B. The representatives will be elected. We elected members or appoint appropriately qualified senior officers. So, out of your body will decide, which one of you might be sitting in this regional representative group, or you may want to appoint a senior officer in that respect. The regional representative group will appoint a subcommittee, and the subcommittee will appoint an entity board who will govern the entity and will require relevant competencies as set out by legislation, and they will be comprising no more than 10 members. The government general policy statement will provide a direction to these entities, and obviously there will be some national policy priorities and various standards to be adhered to, and the board will be accountable to a regional representative group. Now, I would say straight away from my perspective, I find those governance structure extremely complicated. I think having 22 TLAs appointing 5 or 6 representatives to represent all their interests, having a number of iwi appointing or selecting their representatives, that will select a subcommittee, and the subcommittee will select a board of governors for the entity, and the board of governors will only be accountable to the regional representative group, which nationally will have some kind of sub-regional groups to advise them. In my view, it's an extremely complicated system of accountability, and to some degree, it'd be a labyrinth of networks and negotiations before you arrive at some kind of firm decisions. But nevertheless, that is what it is proposed. Now, since the discussions we had in September 21, a number of further developments have taken place. There was a working group regarding the representation, governance and accountability. There's another working group addressing rural supplies and a technical working group, and a planning interface with regards to, that joins the technical group to make sure that RMA provisions and general town planning aspects are linked together. Now, the first piece of legislation has been introduced into Parliament in June, and now is currently under consultation. The members of the community or anyone can have an input into that, provide a response to that through online submissions. There is a plethora of further legislation yet to be enacted or to be produced that will go to Parliament that will ensure all the technicalities of these proposals can be addressed, but the timing of that additional legislation is yet unknown. Just at the high level, the new legislation that is still required to be considered to guide the water services entities covers the elements about the provision of the functions and the required powers related to this service delivery. There will be issues related to new arrangements, for example, how assets are valued and transferred. Current council liabilities are transferred to these entities, current contracts are novated, current protocols and agreements and the treaty settlements are transferred into the new entities, the way of leveraging rates, the way you target rates, the way you borrow money. So I don't have the answer to that. There's a lot of work to be done. If you think about all the powers a single TLA has at this point in time, and you bring them all together, 22 of them into one basket, and you ask them to normalize and to be applied to a new regional entity, you can understand that complicated and tortuous effort if you get to that stage. So obviously the government needs to establish economic regulation and consumer protection regimes, and obviously there will be some significant technical changes to existing regulation and acts like the Local Government Act that dictates our power to enter a property, to install infrastructure, to have agreements with private property owners, to have easements, right-of-ways, and facilities on that basis, which all these things are embedded into the Local Government Act on various provisions of it. So these entities have to inherit all these, components in a way that would make sense and is going to be workable. Again, the government's announcements states that the anticipated legislation will be introduced in late 22 following consideration of the funding, the planning interface and rural and technical working groups. This is still pending. So I suppose my message here is there's still a lot of work to be done, and therefore I don't know the answers. We don't know the answers to that, and therefore talking about those issues with some degree of authority seems to be a bit pointless, because you don't have the information in front of you to say, how is that going to affect us? So until you see that legislation being proposed and this detailed structure, it's all subject to speculation. Now, the first working group, which is a representation, governance and accountability working group, produced these outcomes, and in May the cabinet accepted that. They produced about 47 recommendations with 5 themes, and the government obviously stated that they intend to update the legislation to take into consideration those 5 themes or 47 recommendations. But in a nutshell, those 5 areas relate to ownership. They have agreed that they have to enshrine public ownership of those assets, so they will not be able to be privatized. There will be some kind of shareholding, for example, for communities, every 50,000 people will be entitled to 1 share. Again, that's fine. I read it. I'm not really sort of an expert into that area to have a legal view about it. Co-governance, will be enshrined, and obviously that decision about services will be based on merit approach into the wastewater services boards. Now, merit again. While there is a significant talk about the merits or the qualifications of the iwi representatives into these WSC boards, I haven't seen yet any detailed information about other technical or qualifications the boards should have to be members of that, of that board. For example, do you need to be a qualified engineer? Do you need to be a qualified accountant? Do you need to be a planner? I haven't seen details of that. The other area, of course, it's in the they tried to strengthen accountability through the proposal to establish, other than the 1 regional representative group representing all 22 TLAs and iwi groups, to have sub-regional groups that liaise and communicate with a regional representative group, which is not too much different to things we've got at the moment, like the regional transport group, for example, or joint committees. Now, for those of us who work in these areas constantly, that's a complicated process actually to elevate a local strategic priority into that regional approach. Te mana o te wai obviously is a significant element of these reforms, and especially from the tangata whenua perspective. And again, I think that's quite important to be recognized that it will be embraced and it will be becoming part and parcel of overarching principles of the strategies to be developed. And again, as you said, my question then says, is this strengthening connections with the regional representative groups, EU representatives, sub-regional groups, board of directors, subcommittees, is this a legible, workable, viable connection to local interests? And I'm posing that question. I'm struggling in my mind to understand the optimization and the streamlining of that in a way that would be meaningful for the priorities you may have as a TLA. At the same time, while the government is proceeding through those groups, they went ahead and established the national transition units. And through that transition units, they went away and started setting up what they call the local transition teams. For example, in the NDB, which represents 22 TLAs, they all officers who work in the TLAs at the moment, they will participate into local transition groups, called the regional transition teams, and they will participate to share information, exchange normalization procedures, asset information, information gathering, intervention procedures, financial procedures, and so on. The problem I have with that is that this National Transition Unit is the only unit that represents the government, and they are accountable only to the minister. So they're not accountable. Their primary mandate is to make sure the transition from the current arrangements to the new arrangements taking place. And to do so, they seek, and they do actually take a lot of our time. The second thing, they want to second officers like myself and my staff to take part in a lot of meetings, a lot of workshops, a lot of Zoom meetings, exchanging information, prepare the into place to enable a smooth transition. Now, again, I pose this question to you, is that here I have a national transition team which rests in Wellington, harvesting TLA's resources, people like myself and my staff and all the other TLAs, seeking a significant portion of our time every day, every week, to facilitate an objective that is accountable only to the minister. But of course, what that does, it takes away you paying us to be here, you paying us to do a business as usual, you paying us to deliver your strategies, whatever you might think the strategies are, okay? But then the government, the National Transition Unit, is harvesting all these resources at the possible expense of the local authorities for which we are contractually obligated to work for, to serve the government's interests. And I think that's a risk, it's a danger. They assume that we have an obligation to work with them. I'll give you a quick example. A couple of weeks ago, they decided to have an NTDB meeting, local transition team in Tapo, or 2 days workshop, and they said to us, you're going to come in Tapo and spend 2 days to talk about that. And I said, no, I'm not coming. And they said, but you have to. And so, what are you going to do about it? The point is that you spend 2 days of a week to go and talk about something that you still don't have clarity, and that means I will give away my responsibilities here. And I suppose from my perspective, I've got an old wise back home that says that if you're a priest that serves 2 churches, you're cheating on one. And, I find that a little bit challenging to be able to perform to my full ability, my duties and responsibilities to yourselves and our community, and at the same time slave to the government's, time frames and directions. I need to be aware of what's going on, obviously, and participate, but those are increasing. So various elements of this transition work demands of myself and my staff revolve around people in workforce, finance and corporate services, commercial and legal elements that guide and govern all our activities, asset management, and contract and services operations. Again, it might appear to be simple on this PowerPoint, but there are a lot of complications behind that. It takes a lot of effort and energy to be done, and therefore trying to create a new framework for the future while we're serving our current, is not really conducive to an efficient and optimum performance of our. A very quick reminder of what our council's 3 waters assets are. Just a quick presentation, a treatment plant, water supplies, UV treatment, and so on. Again, in the water supply, we've got a whole range of assets. We've got, wastewater the same. The community and yourselves and your predecessors have invested a lot of money in building and operating and maintaining these kind of systems. And obviously, those things are very important as services to our communities. I want to pay a little bit of time onto that. This is a snapshot which is probably a bit old at the moment, about more than a year old, but represents basically the replacement cost of our three water assets if you use current asset valuations. Probably our actual assets replacement value are just over $1 billion. Just to round it up, we have assets that have got a replacement value of about $1 billion. The depreciation, replacement cost about $400,000. Basically, in rough water, and to address some of the comments we get from the community, and I suppose rightfully, from sometimes, it says, well, we will give our assets to someone else. I want to labor the point here is that this is just looking at one end of the balance sheet only. You got to look, when you have assets, you also have got liabilities on the other side too. And clearly, those numbers there indicate that for every dollar of asset we may transfer one day to these WACs, we also transfer at least a dollar of liabilities, a minimum, for replacement value. That on top of the operational costs, maintenance costs, legislating requirements, and so on. So I think the notion that sometimes our assets will be given away to someone else is not strictly speaking correct. Yes, it's the assets, but also the ongoing liabilities of that, of that particular asset there too. And again, the question of infrastructure assets is not as straightforward as our personal assets. If you own a house, or if you own a car, if you own any particular asset, you can sell it. These assets we have in our books at the moment that are not convertible. They are really sort of got a replacement value, a residual value, but they're not really assets that can be sold and be converted into cash. So in a nutshell, I think the diagnosis versus the proposed cure is highlighted in these bullet points there. I would agree, and I think if you look into successive infrastructure strategies we presented since 2015, the diagnosis is consistent with that. Aging assets, we've got historical underinvestment, we do have a scarcity of resources, we've got escalating demands, new standards, new regulations, new growth, and obviously that's a challenge. Also, we need to recognize our assets are not convertible. That means, assets also are a means to an objective, and those objectives are changing. Having, for example, 500 kilometers of pipes, it means nothing. Those pipes are there only for one reason, to provide a service, and therefore we need to make sure the focus has to be on kind of service. Also, the key question for you as elected members is that who defines these objectives? Who decides the objectives? And your governance board here is that you set the objective, and we go away and manage the assets in a way that fulfills these objectives. So, therefore, tangible decisions, how to use the existing assets in an optimized way so we can minimize the cost burden on the community by reusing, repurposing, optimizing existing part of the treatment plant. We're upgrading some new components there too. But you do that because you have aspirations to protect the health of the community, the service level, the environmental components of it, and also to provide capacity for the future. Now, I will ask you to keep very closely in mind, by you giving us a direction, we go away and work out all the technicalities behind it. The MBRs, the compressors, the inlet pump stations, the biosolids, the effluent treatment, and make technical decisions. However, if you had a desire to upgrade the treatment plant to achieve this level of service, it was going to be one project amongst perhaps 50 projects in a regional component. How would you know that is given the highest priority? Because if you do not have confidence in that to be given the priority, that has got a significant impact on your ability to grow, on your ability to protect your environment, and on our ability to maintain a stable level of service. So that's quite important that governance bodies pay attention to the level of service you want, and technical resources focus attention on how to deliver that. Now, I think our September presentation signaled that we have a general alignment with scale advantages, rationalize, harmonize plans and standards, okay, leveraging services based on revenue streams, and obviously to fund future growth requirements, achieving critical mass to retain staff, and to manage risk in a better way by having some more standardized approaches. We are aligned with that in broad terms. Nothing, I don't think we will change that. Aspects that we have concern is that, again, is the potential loss of our ability at your level to pursue and define local community outcomes through elected mandate. And obviously, you do have a significant risk where those entities are set up and they'll be so focused on managing the assets that you'll forget to ask a question, what is the asset there for? What does it serve? Obviously, you have aspirations as a local authority to connect your city planning objectives with the appropriate infrastructure to service objectives. And again, I'll go back into, I call it an overhyped efficiencies, from the reforms. You see, I think the information Ona sent to you earlier, it contains some reports from various other parties. I mean, the government embraced an approach which says, look, the communities have a significant financial challenge in front of them, and they put this figure over the next 30 years between $120 to $180 billion. And also they use the translation of these figures into the potential funding requirements of the communities. Now, these reports you have, and I suppose my advice earlier is that because we are talking a service that's with a long-term outlook in the next 30 years, and potentially longer, trying actually to get an accurate fix of what the potential cost liability is going to be, it's fraught with assumptions. And the longer you go into the future, the longer the variables into that model have potential to be influenced by other factors, and therefore it's not really possible to fix an accurate liability for the future. However, the various reports indicate, in general terms, yes, there will be increased costs for a whole range of reasons: regulations, demand, standards, scarcity of resources, and so on. So, in broad direction, yes, we will be facing more cost challenges, and obviously, local authorities have to be aware of it. So, I think just if you take our national level, but I'm using some numbers here from our own local situation. It says that if we don't embrace the reforms, the funding demand for those services in the next 30 years will triple. And I use some scary figures, especially some say from $1,000 to $9,000. I'll just ignore everyone else. I'll just take Rotorua. For Rotorua, it says in the next 30 years, if done the reforms, your funding demand will jump from $1,200 a year for the three water services to $3,400 a year. And that is supported by the water industry of Scotland and Department of Internal Affairs. Now, the Farrier reports clearly identify that in general direction, its order of magnitude is right, but we cannot fix it very accurately. These water service entities are supposed to achieve 3% efficiencies of the funding and not the cost. It's quite important to know the government is talking about the future funding requirement for the three waters. And they say because the funding is going to be there and because your local governments are not allowed to borrow a lot more money because you are close to your borrowing limits, you will have no option to transfer these funding requirements onto the individual users. That means the cost to your ratepayer will jump from $1,200 to $3,400. That's what they say. And of course, I find that a little bit sort of misleading because they say we will moderate that achieving 3% efficiencies into that funding requirement because of scale and so on. Well, it's quite easy to state that sort of efficiency target when in about 2-3 years' time or 5 years' time, everybody will forget what the baseline was. And then the second thing is that when you're looking at the moment, the current cost of goods price indices runs between 11 and 13%. So what? Even if you achieve 3% efficiencies at scale, you're still going to face a 10% sort of demand on the costs. Now, and again, the fundamental question is that, okay, let's assume these numbers are right. Let's assume, forget the argument about the accuracy of the model and so on. What does that mean? From your perspective, if you are a governance body and says, well, over the next 30 years, if we made a policy decision to recognize the future funding demand, and we've made a policy decision for every LTP, every year, to increase the funding, the fees and target rates for our three waters by 3.5% per year, in 30 years, you will achieve the same funding requirement you've got. If you are increasing your targeted rate by 3.5% per year over 30 years, you will get to the $3,400. The question is that affordable or not? I mean, you can do that. There's no barrier to you. But so it's not a big threat, barrier to you to do that. 3% of an asset that represents about 30% of your services is not really insurmountable. And again, they talk about the communities having an affordability issue. I think, in my opinion, affordability is linked to economy. If you have a poorly performing economy at a local level, and obviously the income for each individual family is kept low, affordability is a problem. But on the conversely side, if you are not able to make tangible and targeted investment decisions that will encourage your local economy and encourage growth, encourage industry, tourism, housing, and so on, well, the question is that you're never going to overcome the affordability issue. The issue is going to be, are you going to be able to have a targeted approach to economic investment that encourages the economy and therefore the level of economic impact in your community to afford 3% rates increases on three waters every year? So there's no guarantee that these things will be achieved under these WSCs other than trust us, they will. I think the key message from the government is quite simple, in my opinion. You asked the question, why don't you allow the local authorities to try to achieve their new standards of regulation? And what they say, we don't trust the TLAs to do this. Now, what is the evidence behind that? And again, if I would digress a little bit, yes, there is tangible evidence that over the years, assets, especially in the three waters, unseen assets or underground, they have suffered from underinvestment. I agree with that. If you look into the Office of the Auditor General reports since at least 2012, it states that TLAs have consistently underfunded their level of depreciation to the level about 75% of it. Only funding 75% on average. The 2018 Office of the Auditor General report indicates that the foreseeable 2018-2028 investment proposed by councils will be predominantly on social facilities rather than infrastructure facilities. But of course, that's just one of the one side of the balance sheets. I'm old enough and being in the industry long enough to remember a couple of other things. And the question is that why councils struggle with that over the years to fully fund their depreciation and their maintenance costs. And I remember very clearly from the early 90s, and a systematic approach started where the governments, whatever show, they withdrew from a number of services. If you remember, most of you, for example, you should remember that in the 90s, every school had a swimming pool to teach kids to swim and survive. Well, gradually, they remove funding from these swimming pools, and therefore, TLAs have to intervene and create enhanced aquatic centers and public swimming pools. We have to step in and do it as TLAs. The government moved itself from social housing, or at least diminished its approach, and councils have to step in. Government reduces presence in police, resources, and so on, and government started facing safety issues. So TLAs started addressing the demands within finite resources, and the reality is that over the last 30 or 40 years, assets under the ground became the poor cousin of assets and other demands for the community. So the government is disingenuous when you say we don't trust TLAs because they haven't invested prudently. But in the long term, obviously, they don't recognize the government's own contribution to that sort of dilemma the councils have. So they say that, if you allow local elected members to make prudent decisions, their local short-term politics, will override prudence, and they will underinvest in assets and incur service risks. Well, and obviously, Three Water Services is too critical to be left in the poorest issue of TLAs. I find it a little bit oxymoronic and contradictory, in my opinion. I might be wrong. From one hand, the government is saying, look, I don't trust locally elected members to make these fundamental strategic decisions. But the governance structure of this WESC anticipates that the same elected members will be sitting in the regional representative groups, through sub-regional groups, and through co-governance approaches, and they can be trusted to borrow up to 800% of our revenue to debt ratio, while the current elected members are not trusted to do that. So it looks a bit contradictory in my view, but again, that's only my view. I find it difficult to align those two together. From one hand, you can have elected members to make prudent decisions, but if you put them into a different framework, yes, they can make prudent decisions. So it's difficult. Now, again, we talked about affordability. Again, bear in mind that a lot of some members of the community, and I face it every day, some people say, don't do anything right now because the Three Waters reform will come and someone else will pay for it. There is no evidence at all that the cost of running Three Water Services in the future under this new proposed structure will be paid by anything other than normal rates, targeted rates, fees and charges, or borrowings. The end user will have to pay that cost one way or another. All the government is saying that we allow these entities to normalize the annual burden by borrowing more money. So again, I've got some significant doubts about the assumed efficiencies by the water services entities, and obviously I've said earlier in my September report too that there's a credibility gap in terms of assuming that you're going to achieve all these efficiencies, and therefore you don't need to spend $180 billion on that. Again, from the governor's perspective, the driver for these services, it has to be the level of service. One, if we assume a reasonable management competence is in place, then the next factor that influences the cost of these services is the level of service to meet baseline regulations, healthy drinking water, healthy sewage, good management of stormwater, and therefore the good decides this kind of level of service? Who makes these final decisions? Who is better to make the decisions other than the local PLA who've been elected to represent the community? They use the same funding and revenue streams for the WCCs. Again, it's going to be a user cost. And again, I'm a little bit sort of perplexed by the fact that for the last 2 years, the government's reforms have focused so much attention on the governance of the WSCs. In my view, the governance component of that represents a very small fraction of the complexity of the problem. So I said to you earlier, I'll come to you for a treatment plan and say, what do you want me to achieve? And you define what you want to achieve. That's only a small portion of the thinking process. Behind that is going to be how, what, where, how much it's going to cost, what are the mixes and so on. But for 2 years on these reforms, it's all about who sits on the representative group and not enough attention yet onto the intricacies and the complexities of managing complex assets. And that's really unfortunate. So the community says we want to have a say. Some of you want to have a say. You are entitled to have a say. I think you are absolutely right to have the final say into that. I list all these sort of things here that work still to be done. I don't know the answer to that. There is no tangible, practical, realistic information you can say. They propose X, Y, Z. What do you think about it? So I think sort of overall, while we're working through all these issues, we do face some major disruption risks. The transition demands ask to dedicate more and more of our limited resources in assisting the transition, while our accountabilities are really with you, not with the minister. There's a risk that these entities, in the absence of confirmed objectives and set targets, might not achieve these benefits they purport to achieve. So what after that? What's going to happen after that? You have to get established. And also the risk is that your staff, and again myself and my staff, been so distracted with all these transition processes that I would not be able to fulfill my legitimate duties to you on a day-to-day basis. The demand is significant. And obviously, there is a significant potential there could be abortive efforts. They will try something, government has spent close to about $50 million, I understand today, in terms of consultants, and advertisements and information, provision and so on. That could be, could be abortive in the future. So these are risks that we need to be aware of. But primarily, the biggest risk is that it's a distraction for us at this point in time. It's a distraction that's got no meaningful, tangible possibility of serving it in a prudent way, and therefore you do need to be aware of that. Again, we outlined that in September. I don't think that is still invalid. We want to see that the Three Waters actually serve our community, and that the level of service they receive are consistent and compatible with your expectations. And obviously, at some point in time, these water service entities should have an accountability line to TLAs. There's no question about that. Now, looking into the overall process today, and I know there's been a lot of discussions, a lot of debate, I think my view is that the September 21 position, in my view, remains valid and prudent. If you look into the position paper, it says, look, we recognize these issues, but we have significant concerns how these proposed reforms will address them in a meaningful way for our community. I think considering all these unresolved, yet to be legislated components in the matters, I don't think we're in a position at this point in time to say we support the reforms. I would not advise you to support the reforms at this point in time, pending all this outstanding piece of work. I said earlier, if someone asks you a question, what if? Well, if, assuming all these things have been resolved, our position paper, preliminary position paper in 21 stated very clearly, and in a simple term, is that the new entities have to commit to fulfill a three-water strategy that this TLA has agreed to. So basically, you would like to see this board of directors of the WSCs to say, we commit to meet your strategic outcomes in your three waters, and you will articulate what the strategic outcomes are, and they will agree to report and be accountable to you as a TLA how they deliver those kind of outcomes. I'm not convinced that the individual consumer having consumer guarantees and consumer access, will have any meaningful way of holding these, three water entities, to account. Yes, there'll be regulations, but at the same time, your ability to align investment in your infrastructure at a level that is consistent with your community objectives is a bit nebulous at this point in time. So that's what I want to say. I'm more than happy to respond to any questions. I'm sorry it's a bit long, but it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of interactions taking place. And again, I'll reiterate that is my personal views, the best as I can give it to you on basis of my own experience, but more than happy to listen to your comments and make some decisions from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros, for a very comprehensive presentation. I think you pulled no punches. I've asked staff to come up with a recommendation that perhaps we can, before I open for questions, just have a look at on the screen, and I'm happy to move this, crossing out the first does, but we'll hold that. Are there any points of clarification anyone wants to ask of Stavros before we put up a recommendation and discuss? Councillor Roko, thank you.
Yes, that was very helpful. Thank you, Stavros. Stavros, that group that there were 47 recommendations that I am aware that the government took on board. So, are they still working through and looking to see after those recommendations, is there anything further that group's going to come back to the government on?
My understanding that group make their recommendations to the government, the minister, I suppose, and the cabinet agreed, to the direction of those, and now they're trying to embed it into their legislative, framework. I think we have an opportunity here to make a submission to that, to that bill that's in the Parliament at the moment. As I said, to the best of my knowledge, they stopped doing any more governance work. So the submissions might lead to more adjustments to the bill, but I don't know the outcome of that yet.
Thank you. Thank you, Stavros, for that answer, because we don't yet know the final shape of the bill. Councillor Maxwell.
I'm wondering if we don't indicate yet whether it does or does not yet until we've had some questions, and because this is huge and we've listened for quite a big time on what Stavros has said, and as he said, it's his opinion. Some I agree with, some I don't. And following on from that question that Councillor Rotorua Tate said, the Central Government and Local Government Three Waters Committee of mayors, CEOs and senior people met, have had many meetings, and they put forward 47 recommendations and 43 of them were accepted. Now, to me, the question is, Stavros, surely many of the things you raised would have been some of the questions that was raised by the mayors from around the country in various ones, and they would have been included in the 43 recommendations that went along there. Right from the beginning, when we were supportive of the three waters, in my opinion, 67 TLAs they agreed that reform was needed, and nobody wants to go through again another Havelock North with 5,000 people poisoned and 5 deaths. But at the moment, we're in the middle of Parliament has had its first reading, and they've passed their first reading. They're going into consultation now on select committee. I think it's a bit foolish for us to start saying, no, we don't support it now.
We're not debating this yet. Sorry, Councillor Maxwell.
I'm doing both here. Sorry, I'll ask a question and I'll repeat that again later. But for me, the question is, Stavros, surely many of the things that you raised would have been raised by that big group of mayors and senior managers and were part of the recommendations that were accepted by the government. Minister.
Some of them. The question, suppose I have Councillor Maxwell, is that if you read the proposed bill in Parliament at the moment, continue to say that accountability of these proposed water service entities will be through their board of directors and their regional representative group, and the sub-regional groups may have an input to shape the strategies of that. My question is that what level of confidence would you or your successors will have in that your local voices, your local agreements, your local protocol commitments you have made, like issues like in Atirangi Way, where he water supply, joint resource concern, joint approaches to managing services, exit of the forest, all these bits and pieces. How would you be confident that those agreements you have made in due diligence and in good faith, with your community, will find themselves to be given priorities in the regional representative group that represents 800,000 people? I don't see in the bill that kind of ability at this point in time. That I'm saying that we need to read the bill carefully and make some submissions to that effect. That's my view. That's how I see it. But you might have a different view as an individual, but more than happy to see it.
Thank you, Stavros. Councillor Kumar, you have a question?
Yeah, to the Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Stavros, for your talk through the three waters and what the Council's view is on. My question is that in September 2021, that was referred to quite a few times. I believe Reynolds and I had voted against it, and it's on the record. So now the recommendation that's come right at the end of it is agreed that Council does not support three waters. Is that on principle what the Council is proposing today as a recommendation?
Can I just ask the Chief Executive to respond to that question?
Yeah, through the Chair. Look, can I recommend that you've heard expert officer opinion at this particular point in time. This was a potential set of 3 resolutions that the Deputy Mayor as Chair were asked to be drawn up. My suggestion is that if there is further detailed questions to Stavros about the proposal that you need to further formulate a position, then that would be appropriate to continue with. Else, my recommendation would be to actually move instead to actually what is your view now, given that you've heard opinion, you've got a lot of the background from your own reading, I'm sure. So what is the position that you wish to actually form with respect to the actual Three Waters reform proposal by government?
Thank you, Jeff. So does anyone still have clarification from Stavros? Councillor McPherson.
Yes. No, it's a question of clarification with regard to jurisdiction of this body, because, as Councillor Kumar pointed out, on the 5th of July last year, Council formally moved governance oversight in this matter, Three Waters, to a joint committee. And we've heard a comprehensive, sophisticated report from officials. My first question is, where is the report from the joint committee that technically has jurisdiction or governance oversight, the phrase used, in this matter?
I'll get Jeff to respond because I don't think there's anything to govern it yet. It's a working group. Jeff.
I think it's through you, Deputy Mayor. I think that's very correct. The decision and the shaping of Three Waters reform is actually not a matter for council to have governance over. Because the decision ultimately is actually sitting with government. So therefore it is government that is providing the governance direction to departments in order to craft the development of the reform proposal. What we have been asked to do, and what we've been doing, as Stavros has outlined, is to respond to ongoing information requests as to the nature of what we do, the nature of our assets and so on. So that's the work that's been undertaken to date. There has been no joint governance, if you like, over shaping or development of this proposal. This is actually a government responsibility.
I agree, sorry, through you, Chair, I agree with the Chief Executive. That's the way it's turned out. But on the 5th of July, we made a decision to allocate governance oversight in this area on behalf of this district to a joint committee with specific membership and specific duties and roles. So I take it from the invitation to ask questions today that indeed our views, our jurisdiction is now being returned to us. It's no longer the responsibility of a joint committee. It's for us to generate advice to give to government. If that's the case, then yes, I have quite a number of views on various aspects of the Water Services Entities Bill, because that's been tabled. It's had its first reading. It is a tangible set of proposals, and I'm happy to respond to those. If it's clear from here on, we have reassumed our duties as an elected members, speaking on behalf of this jurisdiction. If that's the understanding, then we can proceed.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, thank you for those comments. The Chair recognises Gina Rangi, Deputy Chief Executive. You've got some comments to make in response?
Oh, kia ora, thank you. I think it's really important to clarify some of the statements that have just been made. The Council at no time has given up its jurisdiction. First of all, you can't do that under the law. Your role as Council remains as the local government, as set out in the Local Government Act. Secondly, in terms of the resolution that you did pass, what you did was establish a committee that would provide advice and recommendations to both Te Aroha and to the Council. So they are recommendatory only. They were never given a decision-making power, and it was made explicit at the time of that decision. In terms of the committee, I have had a number of meetings with Te Aroha Lakes Trust in particular, who are leading much of the work around gathering together the views of not only Te Aroha iwi, but also of Entity B iwi, so they've taken a primary role in organising across the region. Primarily the issue has been a lack of capacity, particularly due to COVID, and time for people to meet. However, now that the proposals are becoming more well-formed, they have asked, and I have agreed, that we should bring a meeting of that on promptly. Prior to this, there has been very little to discuss because there's still been a lot of questions, from both Council and from iwi, around the reform and the shape of the reforms. And so while that process has been going on, of officials getting information so that we can properly brief the elected members, it hasn't been deemed appropriate to have a meeting to form views.
Can I respond to that?
Not at this stage. I mean, I thank you for that clarification, Gina. And look, Council hasn't abdicated its governance in respect to Three Waters. We made a decision earlier in this meeting on Moray Street infrastructure investment and delegated that to the Chief Executive. So, on with it. I think understand them to be. There's a draft up on the screen. Would someone like to move in direction? Councillor Maxwell. I have moved it. Sorry.
So we haven't got anything up there yet, but motion or second. So I would like to move something, and that is that.
Yeah. I've already moved. So I don't have a seconder. So I've moved.
I'll second it.
That's what's up there.
Mr. You indicated, but it was not a motion, and I want to get a seconder.
You can move them in.
We didn't. That's why we only had questions earlier. We never got into the debate of it, even though I did a little bit. I would like to move that we do support government's Three Waters reform proposal.
Can you just stop for a minute? I'll just get some clarification from the Chief Executive, because I have moved what's up there on the screen. Can
I second that motion, please?
I have a second.
I put my hand up shortly after you, David, so I was going to second that as well. And yeah, it's already been supported.
Thank you.
We can have the discussion, but what is the...
That's what's up there.
Okay.
So I'll read it out so that those online can clearly understand. Can you bring it down a bit, please? Can you scroll down, please, Isabel? It is agreed that Council does not support Government's Three Waters reform proposal, the identified issues being an ongoing lack of clarity on many key aspects of the proposal, a central concern about the likely lack of responsiveness of the proposed reforms to the future needs and aspirations of the Rotorua community, a view that the proposed governance structure is overly complicated and unlikely to provide effective direction, a lack of clarity on future costs arising from overhyped efficiencies, the lack of consultation with the Rotorua community, a view that the centralised nature of the entity will result in a loss of flexibility to respond to local unique needs and mana whenua requirements, an approach to transition which overly relies on council resources to the detriment of existing work programs, that we direct staff to submit to government the identified concerns, that council directs staff to continue to engage with the implementation group, but not to the detriment of existing work programs. It's been moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McPherson. Sorry, she had her hand up first on the screen. But and so I'll open up for discussion.
You want to open it as the mover?
Yeah. So look, I'll as the mover, I'll simply say that we've heard today from Stavros. I am in the position where I've been part of the Rotorua Project Steering Group for sewerage schemes and numerous water infrastructure projects. I've been in numerous hui with mana whenua who are own the land around the source of a number of our water supplies, own the land where we discharge the water from two of our wastewater treatment plants, and I completely agree with the concerns raised by our staff and also the cost to this organisation in terms of staff time when we have a very busy agenda of projects underway in the Three Waters area. So those are my comments. That's why I support the resolution on the screen. Councillor McPherson, then Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the background and work that the Chair has done in the past. I do understand that and appreciate it. Also appreciate the sophistication of the analysis we've heard this morning. It's been extremely complex, and I'm not sure that I understand all the nuances of your arguments. Like the analogy of being forced to serve two churches, it means cheating on one. There are other options, cheating on neither or cheating on both. But I hope my comments are regarded as helpful. Yesterday there was a gathering of a number of interest groups in the freezing cold out in front of the museum, and they are universally opposed to the Three Waters proposals as they currently stand. And the reasons are fairly clear, and if you give me a moment, I'll go through them. Basically, the entities bill that's before Parliament, it's contrary, we believe, to the public interest, and it will be harmful to democracy in its current form. And the first reason for opposing the bill are the nature of the process that's been used, and it's been hinted at in these documents here, and the anticipated outcomes. Communities have not been consulted. You're absolutely right. And they resent the proposed confiscation, as they see it, of ratepayer-funded assets. The approximately 10% offer of compensation is seen as inadequate. And at the end of it all, councils will only have token ownership and no say over management, and that is rejected. The second aspect is the actual model assumptions that are behind the Water Services Entities Bill. Those assumptions...
Point of order, Mr Chairman. Can we please just talk to what has been presented today? Thank you. Pardon?
Your point of order is relevant.
It is relevant, yes. I wanted to talk to this today.
And
these are directly relevant because they're based on what's in the bill. So how can they be relevant? Seriously?
Talking to council's position.
Yes, thank you.
So please remain focused on council's position.
Another issue that's not mentioned up there is the extent to which $8 billion of additional debt is going to be accumulated over 30 years does not need to be repaid. That's not one of the concerns up here that ought to be up there. And the this has been thought through extremely carefully.
It has, because you're presenting it. No, sorry. I want to hear. We heard this morning.
Councillor McPherson, if you stay on the motion that's on the screen and talk to that, and not talk to the wider.
Is it improper? Is it irrelevant to raise issues that also add to the substance of these reasons why we would not support Three Waters? Of course it isn't. You can't constrain debate simply to what's already been put up in the motion.
We are not submitting on a bill. We don't have the second bill to submit on. So please stay on the comment. Your time is running out.
Is there a time limit to what I have to say? Well, I'll then move straight to the practicalities. In addition to this, the argument put up was that we need to focus on service, not asset management. Thoroughly agree. Entirely appropriate to say that water infrastructure and services can be improved by mandatory national standards. That's broadly agreed. But also by using fair and targeted funding of solutions that are customised by district. We do not need this massive overlay. And one of the reasons why the funding is not adequate to what's being proposed is that federal government departments don't pay local rates, and that would be an excellent source of appropriate finance. And finally, there is a model, a practical model that's been used across the country for managing the development of roading. It's the Wakakotahi model for sharing costs. That model will do fine to attend to these problems. And my last point is, you raised the issue of poor stewardship versus unfunded mandate. It came up as a the presentation. Strongly agree. That the covenant arrangements being proposed discriminate against on and are anti-democratic. Thank you for listening.
Councillor Maxwell. Thank
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to try and actually put a positive corridor on this that's happening, which is actually happening now in Parliament as we speak. But going back to the beginning, 67 TLAs all agree that reform has to happen, is needed. And the committee was set up. Heard this morning could have been included in that. So I want to ask the question again, is that can these still go forward to that group who will deal with it? I hope. And you mentioned about the entity B and 22 iwi, that's huge. And I know I believe we'll have a greater role. And it takes a lot of courage, like a lot of things that we've done in our term of council here last term. And I believe Minister Nanaia Mahuta is showing leadership and courage. You mentioned, and we've already passed a motion earlier of building for the future and receiving initial funding to get going on the three waters. So I'm sure there's a budget in there also, Stavros. So I just urge, have faith that things will be covered. But I also just on Parliament, as I said, it's gone past the first reading. It's in consultation stage now, where any of the other issues that people have can surely put forward then. There's talk about te mana o te wai, and they call it korowai. And one big one that a lot of people who've been emailing things to us have been harsh on that council that we are going to sell. Well, one of the big things about te mana o te wai is they will never sell. Just like when 1966, the dreaded Public Works Act took our river, our taniwha away from
You're talking about, can we...
Yeah, we're talking about our position on the motion.
And I was about to get to something that is a big tick. We're a finalist in the local government awards next month for our relationship with our council, and here we are going to, the vote might go against supporting the three waters, but enough to say that some things that we've got would be amongst it. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Councillor, followed by Councillor Rotorua.
Our reform proposal. It has been a long time coming for this to come to elected members, for us to be able to provide our position on this. And I want to thank Stavros and his staff for the expert opinion on this. This will have significant consequences. This decision, and if these reforms go through, will define the next 50 to 100 years for our communities and the other communities around Aotearoa, and how we can guarantee those levels of services for around the lack of clarity on future costs arising from overhyped efficiencies. This is a concern projected benefits from the government. So what we need to be clear on is that our communities will get a fair deal and also guarantee that that local voice will be kept in our communities. So I acknowledge the work in the presentation today that's gone into forming this view. In the past, I have advocated for the need for community consultation, but I do take on board Stavros's point that there is a lack of information for us to be consulting on, and actually we should be pushing back on the government to ensure that they are the ones who are consulting with the Rotorua community and others about their reforms, because it is really important, as I say, that people are able to have a voice in these decisions that will have significant changes. So I support this very much, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rotorua.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Of course, there's still a lot needs to be done in this area by the government, but you know it's unfortunate that various governments in this country always seem to go offshore to try and see a solution to our problems. Indeed, of course, we see here with Scotland, and that's the model that they've been using. But they've used it in education, in justice, and indeed health as well. And New Zealand is quite capable of actually putting forward solutions to our own problems, as if every imported solution was what is going to do it for us. I have to say, after listening to you this morning, Stavros, if I ever was inclined to support the Three Waters, certainly not now. There are some things in the legislation that does have merit, and we've heard from various councils around the country who have said this is good for them, and it may well be. But certainly there are far more issues of concern that I think at this point that need to be shot home to the government. I actually believe the government is railroading us, councils, to actually agree and tick this one off. This is too big an item for the government. If you're talking about trust, and the government, central government, doesn't trust LTAs to deliver on the Three Waters, I would have to say that my trust in them is not all that great at present. So no, I'm really concerned now. I do want our community, I do want the government to receive this. They need to know that we, at this point in time, with all the lack of clarity, and also with unless many of these points are actually answered to our satisfaction, I don't support them. I don't support the Three Waters. I think everything is still unclear, and it is a matter of trust as well. And it doesn't matter which government is in over the past. I haven't seen anything substantial, particularly in relation to this and other key issues for our country where we're actually getting benefit. So I do support this being made. And I wonder also if we could ensure that our community is aware of our stance at this time, given still all the issues that we actually want answers to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kai Fong, followed by Councillor Axe.
Chair, yeah, I'm happy to support the motion as it is there, but I also wonder that it should go a little bit further. I mean, Stavros has given us a fairly lengthy presentation with a lot more pros and cons, and just even the slide "Are we ready for community views?" outlines a number of other issues that haven't been identified in the body of work by government, and whether the line that says directs staff to submit to government the identified concerns, I think the identified concerns should actually include the materials in the presentation, not just what's on the board. And so I don't know whether there might be some slight amendment to the wording to include some of the other issues that Stavros has quite rightly included in the slides, and I think that would perhaps cover off the concern of Councillor McPherson around like the debt levels and things like that, because I think those were raised in the slides. So I don't know how that might be amended, but perhaps...
Point of order. That is clear, and lack of clarity on future costs arising from overhyped efficiencies. We could be here all night if we want every little aspect of that extensive presentation incorporated in a resolution.
I think the opportunity...
Point of order. Can we hear a fellow councillor, please? Thank you.
Oh, so I think the issue here is that we're trying to make a point to government that we don't agree with their Three Waters reform proposal, and we're trying to put up the rationale for why we don't. Stavros has given us a number of reasons which are actually not up on that board but have been given us today in that presentation, and I think that it would actually strengthen our opposition to the Three Waters proposal if those additional matters were referred to. So, I mean, he's got in here legal separation of risk, agreement protocols, consents, novation, asset transfer, all the things. So they're not actually up there, but they have been talked at length. That's just one of the slides. I can go back to the, I mean, basically I'd be repeating Stavros' presentation. Well, I think that it's more than just the identified concerns, but in any event, if no appetite to give more strength to our opposition, I would go with what is up there, but that, you know, we
the seconder is happy, that line where the cursor is now, add the words, submit to government the identified concerns outlined in the DCE infrastructure and environmental solutions presentation. Happy with that?
Well, I would be really, it would be great. I think Councillor Tapsell seconded it, not Councillor.
Sorry, Councillor Tapsell. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, Councillor, where am I up to? Are you finished?
On that basis, I'm happy, more than happy to support what's up on there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yates. Councillor Yates, then Councillor Wang, then Councillor Kumar. Right, thank you.
Kia ora, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. I too support this, and one of the areas that I would like clarified too, just given that we are also speaking to Entity B, and you weren't able to provide us with the number of iwi at this point in time, Stavros, I'd just like to remind our council too that during that, throughout that Entity B, we actually comprise of the largest number of waka. So of the 7 or 8 or 10 odd waka, we comprise of at least 6 of our waka, which is the largest iwi representation, which once again, even if we were just to break that down, Te Arawa, we one of the largest number of iwi. So with that being in mind, I too support this. Why it's more
be supporting the motion on the table today and with the amendment as well. I remember back in October when this issue was first pushed onto local councils across the country, when we, not something that we asked for support, more support, more funding to help our infrastructure, but not something that would be essentially taking away local voice in the decision making. And I really thank Stavros and the team and the work that they have put into this. I definitely know it hasn't been easy, and really would like to support that point on if we have these projects like our wastewater treatment plant upgrade, massive project, when we have those projects so significant to our community, how are we to, almost bargain and try to negotiate in such with 21 other TLAs for priority? There is a real need for change, and I think councils across the country have been crying out for support, for funding, and support to address infrastructure investment. But that's what should happen. It's not support and funding for us again to address the intergenerational infrastructure and long-term planning. I mean, we've got our climate change action plan, we've got our long-term plan, but not overreaching to take away the local autonomy on our assets, paid for by Rotorua locals. Rotorua, I think we're also in a very unique position where a lot of our water infrastructure wouldn't have been able to take place without the work that the council has done to strengthen the partnership with iwi, with mana whenua, and I think that really needs to be acknowledged as well. I feel like we were forced into this position, and unfortunately this has also, I guess, affected our councils across the country, their reputation in their communities as well. Not through their own fault. This has been unfortunately pushed onto them, and we're having to almost play catch up, but to almost defend ourselves against this. So I'm absolutely happy to be supporting this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wang, and most of the speakers have been in support, but Councillor Kumar, I will give you a shot at.
I'll keep it to bullet points and very brief. Thank you very much, Chair. I think when you look right throughout the country, where so many paddocks you drive through, whether it's Auckland and all, and the sign, just a simple sign, stop three waters. That's the voice of the people, the voice of the community. So this motion, if it succeeds today, is a victory for the community. It's a victory for the people, by the people. And this is the democratic process people have wanted. Communities that built their own water schemes, that have asked council to administrate for them. This is a victory for them. And if the government was going to be very open and democratic, they should have held a referendum instead of trying to indoctrinate a scheme that the people did not want to accept. So yes, I will support this motion when it comes to the table.
Thank you, councillors, for a good round of discussion. I thank you, Councillor Wang, for your comments regarding iwi enablement of where we've got to with Three Waters infrastructure that we've implemented. And I know from sitting on the Te Aroha Lake Strategy Group and from the various project steering groups we've had on infrastructure projects, we simply would not have got infrastructure across the line without that that partnership approach. And Councillor Maxwell, we would not have been a finalist if we'd had a central body administering water infrastructure for 22 TLAs, in my view. So with that, I'll put the matter to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Like it noted? Yep. Thank you. The motion is carried.
Just a question through to the chair. Is there a bylaw on signage regarding resource consents for Three Waters?
That's not relevant. We'll take that question offline. You could discuss that with Chief Executive or Mr. Pewhairangi later on. Councillors now have a resolution to go into public excluded. I intend to press on because it's a very short agenda and confidential. Is there a mover to go into public excluded? Councillor Raukawa takes, seconded Councillor Kai Fong. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. We'll just wait while the live stream is paused, and thank you, Felix, and the public for your attendance today.